Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back from another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get into it. First, we have "Who would you rather have for president?" posted by you socialists or morons, and they said, "The man who has turned Argentina around against all odds and slashed poverty, or the man who clings to an ideology which is the single largest man-made cause of poverty in the world." And then the vote was, it was between Javier Milei and Zoran Mamdani, and Zoran Mamdani got 21 votes, and Javier Milei got 15 votes. And yeah, personally, I'd probably for Milei over Mamdani, if on economic issues, I would say. But, I definitely would probably agree with Mamdani more on Israel. But regardless, I think, if voting mattered, they wouldn't really let us do it. So I personally, don't really care for voting in the first place. But yeah, I definitely do think Milei is probably as good an economic libertarian as you can get when it comes to an actual elected official, even though I vehemently disagree with the man on Israel. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Rubio's paranoid Cuba report designed to justify military attack on Cuba, says Democratic rep, posted by Jedi Porcupine. That's a post from The Intercept. Cuba, I guess, entitled the same thing. And, yeah, personally, I do think the U.S. government wants regime change in Cuba. The U.S. government seems to want regime change everywhere. We already kidnapped the Venezuelan president and got into war with Iran this year. I guess maybe they'll go for the trifecta and go for Cuba as well. And, yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But, ultimately, if the U.S. government wants to invade whatever country it wants to invade, there's really nothing you can do about it. They're in a position of authority to do so. And, yeah, it probably won't change when the other branch of the Uniparty takes power. If you look at stuff like Libya and Syria, that they bomb them just as much, if not more, than the branch of the Uniparty currently in power. Next we have, is it America first or Israel first? Posted by Rabat Ascalon, and that's a cross post from the Track IPAC subreddit. And yeah, personally, I would say, they might say America first in the campaign trail, but, when they get in office, it's Israel first, and that's not something I particularly care for. But, if they want to justify sending all the money to Israel, it just doesn't really, it just goes to show you, you shouldn't be forced to pay taxes when you don't get to go where they go to, because a lot of people don't want all their taxpayer dollars sent to Israel, but, the government can justify sending them there anyway, even if you don't want them there, and that's why I think, the taxes should be voluntary, but at the very least, if they are forced, you should at least be able to earmark where your taxpayer dollars go to. Next we have America First ? Posted by Jedi Porcupine, and that's a screenshot of a tweet from Thomas Massey. The U.S. has been significantly weakened by the war with Iran. The administration depleted our missile defenses, drained our oil reserves, sacrificed our men and women, inflated the price of consumer goods, increased our debt, and neglected our domestic needs, all for Israel. And yeah, personally, I would agree with that. I personally don't think they should have gotten into war with Iran in the first place, but, ultimately, the U.S. government's always going to go to war with some country, or push regime change in some country, regardless of which branch of the Union Party is in power, and oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it. Next we have, Republicans back Trump's legal fury to continue the Iran war without congressional approval. The Constitution is much too woke, and that's posted by Woke Boogeyman. That's cross-posted from the Politics subreddit, and that looks like a link to an MS Now article, Republicans back Trump legal fury Iran war. And, yeah, personally, I don't think they should be justifying continuing the Iran war, but if they want to justify it, ultimately, people can justify whatever they feel like, especially when they're in positions of state authority, especially when it comes to the executive branch, since they're the one who ultimately controls the force of the state. And, yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next we have, not standard for Taylor Farms to ask White House to delay cyclospora recall, ex-FDA head says, and that's an article from TheGuardian.com posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I would agree with that, but ultimately, the White House can ask can ask private companies to do whatever they feel like, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. The White House asked Twitter and other social media platforms to censor stuff that went under the went against the COVID narrative under Biden, but Reddit says that was justified, or they sweep it under the rug. But suddenly, the Orange Man's White House asked the private company to do something, and suddenly it's the worst thing ever. I personally don't care for big government colluding with big business, but that's very much how it is. Back in the early 2010s, I always like to say, you had the Occupy Wall Street said big business is the fourth source of all our problems. You had the Tea Party, which says the big government is the source of all our problems, when in reality, they're very much oftentimes one and the same. As George Carlin famously said, it's a big club, and you ain't in it. That's very much, and that's why they started pushing stuff like identity politics and Trump to divide people, right? Because, a lot of people don't like the elite class in power, and that's why, they push divisive identity politics messaging and Trump to divide people, because they're very good at dividing people like that. Next we have Defense Minister Katz visits jailed settler accused of tying Palestinian by genitals, posted by Radiant Awareness 478, and that's a cross post from the World News subreddit, and that looks like it's from ynetnews.com. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately, if they want to justify if they want to start doing that. Ultimately, a lot of times people can justify doing stuff if they're in a position of state authority, and oftentimes you can't hold them accountable since they control the courts and legal system as well. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, Israel's on the other side of the world. It's not the U.S.'s business what goes on there. If they want to justify doing stuff like this, I personally think it's wrong. But I definitely do think the libertarian position is get out of Israel entirely. Don't give aid to them or the Palestinians. Focus on the home front first and foremost. Truly be America first rather than Israel first. Next we have GOP Congress refuses to do their job yet again, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a cross post from the Good News subreddit. Trump sued hours after new tariffs takes effect, as experts say they may not hold up. And that looks like a story from CNBC.com. And yeah, personally, the Congress can only do so much. They supposedly write the laws, but it doesn't matter what they write when the executive branch enforces the laws. So if they want to write whatever they want to write, it doesn't really matter. If they want to say no to all tariffs are illegal, it doesn't matter if the president, because oftentimes the executive branch can justify enforcing them anyway, and Congress is just all bark and no bite. Same with the Supreme Court. They can make whatever rulings they want to. They're not the ones in charge of enforcement. Next we have Argentina free market renaissance continues, from WashingtonPost.com, posted by Socialist or Morons. And yeah, personally, as I said earlier, I disagree with Javier Milei vehemently in Israel, but I definitely do think he's probably one of the best world leaders from an economic perspective when it comes to economics these days. And yeah, personally, I really like what he's doing in Argentina. But, of course, Reddit's going to be against it because they want woke communism rather than any form of libertarianism, and that just goes to show you that Reddit, if it were up to them, the world, the country, if Reddit was running the country, we'd probably be worse off than North Korea. You'd have woke censorship of anything deemed to be wrongthink. They say, oh, we just want sensible content moderation for hate speech and misinformation. Well, those are fundamentally free speech. Just because you don't like them doesn't mean they're not free speech. And yeah, that's why I personally don't really take this website seriously. It pretty much always ends up being a woke communist circle jerk, regardless of the subreddit you're on. And that's my thoughts there. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.